Throughout my whole career, I never had an adverse circumstance arise. I've had some challenging ones, like during my flying training over in Northern Ireland. I had two incidents, just minor incidents. One is where I lost all my hydraulics, but they just sent me across to Ballykelly that had very, very long runways. And with the old gunnet, you put it on the ground and it rolls to a stop. And the other one was doing a letdown in Northern Ireland. We did a lot of instrument work because in Northern Ireland, we're over there in the wintertime, and we learned to fly pretty well on instruments, and it was nothing to just be launch off for 2 or 3 hours and fly around in the snowstorm conditions for 2 or 3 hours. And you'd come home, and in those days, they'd just have the VDF letdown, not the radar letdown or instrumentation letdown that you have these days. You'd be talked down at 2 miles. You have to be doing 120 knots in it, and at 1,200 feet. And these were being called. You're at 2 miles, you should be at. So you just had a constant rate of descent. And on one occasion, I was given the time instead of the QNH to set my altimeter, and I ended up being 300 foot low all the way down until I came down to break off altitude that was 600 feet, and I broke off when my altitude was showing 900 feet because I'd had the wrong datum setting on the altimeter. They're the only two minor things that occurred to me. All manageable.
Very good, yeah. All right. Anything else you'd like to say about the Navy side of things?
It was the best thing that ever happened to me.
There you go. And then you transferred... In every respect,
in terms of getting out in the world, seeing people, learning to meet, behavioural pattern, how to live a life in a naval officer's mess, the wardroom protocols, learning the rules of companionship, living in clustered condition on the carrier. All of those things lent great life skills to a bloke that had just lived out in the open air in the bush forever. Great life skills.
Yeah, great life, yeah. And then you transferred out of there to Qantas.
Qantas, out of the Navy on the Friday, into Qantas on the Monday, straight into a 707 course.
And then progressed from there?
Well, from there, the routine was you usually spent about 2 to 3 years in the jump seat as a second officer. You would then do extensive training flying the aeroplane down at Avalon in Victoria to do the first officer training in the right-hand seat. And then your promotion to there depended on that final training in the right-hand seat. Then you could spend anything from 3 to 5 years in the right-hand seat before being promoted to captain, which again was another very extensive period of training. For my part, I trained into the right-hand seat after 2 or 3 years in the jump seat. And at that stage, the company had just bought 747. And I was the most junior of the first officers. And they only bought 2 or 3 747s, so they only needed about 12 first officers. And of course, I had a seniority list a mile long ahead of me, and only the senior blokes would take those positions because there was more money. So all those positions were taken up by senior first officers. But I wisely or unknowingly applied for the 747, knowing full well I'd never get a berth. But then 2 or 3 of those very senior first officers failed the course, and I was the next cab off the rank. So after a year or 2 in the right-hand seat of the 707, I went straight up to the 747 in the right-hand seat and sat there for 6 or 7 years.
So you never bribed anybody? Never bribed anybody?
Not bribing, it was just a seniority system that we had within the company. It was an industrially agreed system between the company and the pilots. That's how we would be promoted through the system and between aeroplanes. And I managed to circumvent it by the fact that a lot of people in the middle, below the first 12 or 15 senior first officers, never bothered to bid for the 747. Myself and a young bloke that got through with me called Kimity, the most junior in the company, had both applied for, and when 2 first officers failed up top, we were promoted up.
Very unusual.
And I got all that experience.
Yeah.
And flying then with the most senior captains in the company that had been there, some great old blokes that knew all the tricks of the trade and were just a great pleasure to be with it. Most of them were ex-World War II fellows and really characters.
Yeah.
Many of I could tell you a mile of stories about all of them.
Thank you.
But I will forego that.
That's very good. So 747s then for you?
747 on and on for about 7 or 8 years.
All over the world?
All over the world, because that was the aeroplane. It was taking over all of Qantas operations, so we literally flew everywhere. And then eventually I became so senior as a first officer, and the company was selling off the 707s, and they only had 2 or 3 left. And through inadvertence, I expect, they needed a 707 captain. So I was able to bid back from the 747 back down to the 707 to get my command.
Oh, okay.
Whereas lots of the people senior to me as first officers weren't able to bid back, because one of the protocols was once you bid onto an aeroplane and were trained on it, you had to stay on it for 2 years. So they couldn't bid back, and I could. So I got a command before a lot of the senior first officers to me, just through that inadvertence. But of course, the 707 didn't last long. I only had 1 year in command, and they sold the last of them. Then I went back to the 747. By this time, I was invited into the training section. I was a check and training captain, a senior check and training captain, and I got some administrative positions subsequently.
And then transferred or progressed to 767?
Well, as soon as they bought the 767 fleet, they needed people to go over there and train the new pilot, train on the new aeroplane. And I bid to go over there straight away, because by that time I was a senior check and training captain, and I was just able to bid over, do the conversion, and start training the pilots on the 767. And that's where I spent the last 8 years of my life in the company. And in fact, I took I retired 4 years early, because I was being called upon by the Director of Flight Operations to go back to the 747-400 in a management position, and I didn't want to do it, so I retired.
So all your aircraft that you've flown, I know there's no favourite and you like flying, but anything particular stand out?
Commercially, the nicest aeroplane to fly was the 767, because this was the new era cockpit. This was the glass cockpit. And going from the 747 200, 100, 200, 300, which was the standard cockpit, to go to the 767 to fly this highly automated machinery was absolutely wonderful. A fully automated aeroplane, auto land, auto take off, the whole shooting match, which we couldn't operate in those days because the ground equipment wasn't good enough, but we could still do auto lands and the like in it. So going into the 767, it was a nice aeroplane. I enjoyed my time.
Oh, very good. Yeah, all right. All right, well, I don't think that's much more. I think we can go. You got anything to add?
Oh, yeah, I've got a lifetime stuff to add, but I think we've spoken about perhaps the most enjoyable part of my life, just for the Navy and for Qantas to give me those big toys to play with or something.
Oh, it's amazing, amazing history of career, and they're the aircraft that I've been also associated with, and one.
Well, I think it's wonderful what you are achieving over in the region and your plans for what you've got there, and the fact that you're amassing all these bits and pieces of equipment, some unique and some unusual, but still all flying machines. It's going to be a handy piece of work in 10 or 12, 15 years' time.
Yes, exactly right, and hope we're all still around to enjoy it, because...
well, I won't be, but I'm sure that a lot of young people will be.
Well, you never know, but it's the vision we have. I'm fully behind it. I'm excited about it, and we've just acquired these aircraft, and hence the talk with you, because we have some of the aircraft that you've been associated with, and that knowledge is invaluable, and
well, it's not going to happen again.
No, that's right, and hence we have a yap, because that stuff goes.
As I said, the Winjeel was a pretty handy sort of aeroplane, but then of course the services went into straight through jet training. The Wirraway was a great old aeroplane, because for a young 19-year-old to get into this machine. The Wirraway could bite you near the ground. You had to be on the money. And to stay with piston engines, the Firefly was a great, big, heavy, capable machine, but gentle. You had plenty of rudder control. The Sea Fury, you had everything going for and little rudder control in slow speeds and so on. So that was the excitement of that aeroplane, and you could do anything. The Gannet, it had lots of capabilities, but in the tropics, it just wasn't the aeroplane that was built to be. Operating it in the North Atlantic was great. You could fly around on one engine, no problems at all. But it certainly was a different aeroplane in the tropical conditions.
And why was that? Just for the heat-wise, with engine performance and hydraulic stuff?
The Armstrong Siddeley engine didn't have a great deal of punch in it.
Yeah, right.
It wasn't. It was just there to turn the propellers.
Yeah. Crew of 2 or 3?
3 crew.
3.
Yeah. We configured it with a pilot, a senior navigator who would do the navigation, and the telegraphist who sat in the rear seat facing rearwards, and he would do the telegraphy, all the radio work. But he was, in fact, a qualified observer, navigator, but his job was that of the junior person in the crew at the time.
All right. And the Firefly?
Firefly crew of 2, pilot and navigator. Sea Fury 1 person. The Firefly was back and forward seat.
So what do they have in between each other? Because it's a pretty long airplane.
Stuff, I guess, radio equipment and the like. In the Gannet, we had equipment, but we had a little tunnel where we could pass notes to each other, just over your left-hand shoulder. But the Firefly, you didn't have that facility. It was all done through the intercom.
Say the difference between the Venom and a Vampire as far as flying capabilities.
Well, the Vampire was just a training aeroplane. It was not a high-powered jet, a gentle machine, easy to fly, as all jets were, because they didn't have any of the tail wheel characteristics or the propeller type of characteristics. It was a gentle. It served its purpose, pretty underpowered, but had side-by-side seating, so it was a good training aeroplane. The trainee pilot sat in the left-hand seat, the trainer sat in the right-hand seat, and it was fully aerobatic and quite manoeuvrable. The Venom, a bigger version of it, more grunt, but still underpowered somewhat. And it was built to be a night fighter. So you had the pilot sitting beside the navigator, who sat a bit lower and sat back behind you a fraction. And that was because he had all his radar gear in front of him, and his job was just to peer into the radar, and so that when you were doing an intercept, the ground would get you to within 5 or 10 miles of your target aeroplane. Then the navigator in the observer in the right-hand seat would pick up the target, and as soon as he acquired it, he would talk you into it to about 200 yards. And then in training, you'd have the stooge aeroplane, and you come into 200 yards, dip under him and become the stooge, and he'd take over, and that's how you would swap as a pair training cruise. But generally, it was again a probably good aeroplane. I never flew it in the North Atlantic, but it was a bit underpowered at sea for the Royal Australian Navy because, as I said, we didn't have a carrier that could launch it.
Fast enough, yeah.
In retrospect, the Venom was an easy aeroplane to land on the deck. It was small and there was plenty of room. The Gannet, for instance, you had to ensure that you got your nose wheel on that centre line at the last minute, because you only had 12 or 15 feet clearance between your right-hand tip and the island. So that if you're off right of centre line, chances are you could pick up the
Clear
island.
it up, yeah. They didn't land Vampires on them?
No, Vampire didn't have a hook on it.
Yeah, righto. That was just a trainer aircraft.
So when you went to the deck, you either went in the Gannet or in the Venom. When one starts off in the Navy, you just start off as a recruit Naval Airman, an RNA, just an ordinary sailor. And we were treated a bit differently, as I spoke to you earlier about. But on achieving our brevet, on getting our flying wings on our arm, we became acting sub-lieutenants. And it was a trainee period. And you were made an officer, but the most junior of officers. From there, after a year, you you were confirmed as a sub-lieutenant. And then a year later, you were made a lieutenant. And for all of my career then, I stayed as a lieutenant in the Navy. To progress subsequently in rank, one would have had to sign up for what they called a permanent commission and then would have gone on to get higher rank. So I left the Navy as a lieutenant. I joined Qantas just as John Blair, second officer, that wore 2 stripes on your arm. As a first officer, you got a 3rd stripe. As a captain, you got your 4th stripe. And once you became a senior check captain or an executive officer, as I was the superintendent of flight standards of the 767, which was an administrative position, you got a star above on your left arm to indicate that you're an administrative pilot. And that's the position I retired from Qantas in as this superintendent of flight standards. The superintendent of flight standards is the administrative position. I was also a senior check and training captain that could train and check pilots on the different types of aeroplanes. So they're all the ranks that I carried.
And that's over what period of time in years?
I joined at the age of 19 and I left at the age of 56.
Yeah, thank you.